everyone. Thank you for watching today. Today we're talking about breaking the cycle and how to heal gut issues without over restricting your diet. I'm passionate about this topic today because in this space of digestive health, we see a lot about restrictive diets and we see a lot of elimination diet. And as a digestive health expert, I use a lot of these diet plans with my patients. So what's the problem then? First of all, if any of you have ever been told that your symptoms are normal or that there's nothing wrong with you, or if you've struggled with a restrictive diet, please let us know in the comments. And today we're going to talk about how to break the cycle without over restricting. Because although these diets can be the most effective tools to calming your symptoms down, which is wonderful when you are suffering from chronic symptoms, that's honestly all you want at first. But it gets old really fast. I've experienced that firsthand when I had that severe acid reflux, that it was so bad, it was eroding my teeth. I couldn't sleep at night because I was coughing and couldn't fall asleep because every time I started to fall asleep, I would cough and my throat was just burning. It felt like it was on fire. And boy, was I happy to figure out what foods were triggering me and find some relief with my symptoms. But it wasn't long before I started wondering, okay, am I going to have to eat like this forever? This just can't be the answer that I just have been eating certain foods all my life and suddenly they're not good for me. Didn't make sense to me, especially because a lot of them are healthy foods. And that's the case with a lot of these different elimination diets. So we're talking about maybe many of the diets that you downloaded to find me, the low FODMAP diet, the low histamine diet, the bland diet. And again, these are wonderful tools, but the key is we don't want to stay there. It's a step and it's a starting point to get things calmed down. So then you can really assess what's going on and what are my next steps. All elimination diets are meant that way. They're supposed to be the starting point, and you're supposed to then reintroduce foods. But unfortunately, it's not always clear. If you're downloading a one-page PDF or even a multi-page PDF that's telling you, here are the foods to eat, here are the foods to avoid, that it's always clear that you're supposed to reintroduce foods. And especially when you see relief from that, you think, oh, okay, I guess I should stay on this diet. But the problem with that is that cutting out too many foods can lead to nutritional deficiencies. Fear of food can damage your relationship with eating. It can also harm your microbiome long term because it can decrease the good bacteria in your gut, leaving you susceptible for other bacteria to come in and overgrow and take over. So that's particularly the case. So let's just break this down. First, we can run into nutritional deficiencies because with a lot of these diets, the ones I just listed, low FODMAP eliminates a lot of foods that basically feed bacteria because so many people with IBS and definitely obviously with SIBO, which is a bacterial overgrowth, but even if you just have IBS, that's your diagnosis. Most people with IBS have some sort of bacterial overgrowth, whether it's in the small intestine or the large intestine. And so the low FODMAP diet helps because it removes the foods that feed bacteria. If we're not feeding the overgrowth, we're also not feeding the body of good bacteria. So that's where our good bacteria kind of dwindles down. When you're not feeding something, it dies off or dwindles down. And then over time, we have a very weak, non-diverse microbiome. We could be more sensitive to fiber and FODMAPs because our system has not seen them in a while. And also with the case of bland diets, for example, bland diets pull out a lot of high fiber foods and keep you on low fiber food like rice and chicken and white bread. And again, that can calm you down initially, calm down your system, calm down your symptoms, but long term, it's going to have a downside. So not just with the microbiome diversity, but also nutrients, because of course, plant foods have lots of good vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, phytochemicals, healthy plant chemicals that help us detoxify, help us prevent cancer, all these wonderful things, help us fight inflammation. And without those foods, we don't have those benefits. And I might be speaking to the choir here because I know that a lot of people that follow these diets, that's one of the things they ask me, or that's one of the concerns. I'll have patients come to me saying this, why am I cutting out all these healthy foods? It doesn't seem right. So you guys notice that too. Now, the problem is that avoiding these foods is not fixing the root of the issue. So whether it's a bacterial imbalance, whether it's a motility issue, which means how quickly food and waste is moving through your system, whether it's inflammation, if the issue is not resolved, the problems will likely worsen over time. Or what can happen is if you go back to the other way, the old way of eating, they just flare up again. So I did notice this early on in my practice. I was thrilled initially, and so were my patients, to find these diets that would help people feel better. But then when we went to reintroduce, some people find success. So I do recommend moving on to reintroduction. But some people just find that they react to everything. And for the person that just reacts to everything you try to reintroduce, that's especially when you need to look at what's going on underneath. The other thing is that medications alone aren't solutions either. So we have PPIs, the acid reducing medications that are often prescribed for acid reflux or gastritis, laxatives for constipation, antibiotics in the case of rifaximin, which is very commonly prescribed for SIBO. Often these are overprescribed, but they don't address the deeper imbalance in your digestion. You're just managing the situation. And certainly we want that relief initially. So I'm not against any of these things, but we want to take it deeper and find a longer term solution by looking at what the underlying cause is. What are underlying causes that we're talking about and how do we address them? That would be, there are different ways to do it. So testing is one way, and I'll talk to you guys about that, but I'll also talk to you about some other ways that you could potentially assess things without testing. So functional testing helps us uncover underlying imbalances. So a full functional GI workup would be a SIBO breath test that tells us what's going on in your small intestine, and a comprehensive digestive stool analysis that tells us, that's a stool test, a single stool sample. It'll tell us, is your good bacteria balanced with your not so good bacteria appropriately? Are there any pathogens, which are guys that shouldn't even be there at all, bad guys, parasites, things like that? It also tells us about your digestion. Are you producing enough enzymes? Is bile being produced and reabsorbed effectively? It tells us about inflammation. So it'll tell us about upper GI, middle GI, and the large intestine in the lower GI area. So it gives us that full picture with those two tests. And those are the tests I very commonly use with my patients. Okay, if you're not ready to look at testing, maybe you're just starting out and you just want to do something at home, you can assess your motility. So let's say that you are wondering if you're, okay, am I constipated? Maybe I'd have a bowel movement every day, but it's just a little bit. So am I fully evacuating? Or maybe you're worried that, am I losing all my nutrients because I'm having quite a bit of diarrhea? Seems like everything I eat goes through me. So am I retaining any of these nutrients? So a motility test can tell you how quickly food is moving through, and ideal is 12 to 24 hours. And the way that you would figure this out is you find something that you would be able to see in your stool. I recommend sesame seeds as long as you don't have diverticulosis. You can also use beets. You can also use activated charcoal. Just keep it away. Don't take it at the same time as you take any medications, supplements, or eat any food. Take it 2 hours away between meals. And you would take maybe 3 capsules or so, maybe 4, 1,000 milligrams. So you eat something that is going to show up in your stool. The sesame seeds make little polka dots in the stool. The beets make your stool red, and the charcoal makes your stool black. And you make a note of when you eat it, and then you make a note of when you see it in your stool. 12 to 24 hours is ideal transit time. If it's quicker than that, then you're not absorbing all of your nutrients. If it's longer than that, then you're not fully evacuating. So you're not detoxifying, and you could be constipated or just in between where you're not fully evacuating, which I consider constipation. Some other ways to assess your stool: if they're floating, if they're greasy, that can indicate you're not absorbing fat well, and you may benefit from digestive enzymes, especially if the stool is clay colored. It could be an issue with bile. So I recommend visiting your doctor. I do recommend if you're seeing floating stool, please check with your doctor before you really try any supplements or anything, especially if you take medications or if you have medical conditions. Okay. But I'll just tell you what I do with my patients for educational purposes, and then you can be armed with this information to ask your doctor about. But if you see floating stool, you may benefit from enzymes with meals. But if it's clay colored, definitely see your doctor, because if it's a bile issue, you want to have that medically evaluated. Also, seeing undigested food in stool. Now, that can just be poor chewing. Most of us just don't chew our food well enough. And so try chewing your food better 30 to 40 times. That's a habit. It takes some time. Also, it could be enzyme deficiency. It could be not enough stomach acid to activate those enzymes, because enzymes have to have an acidic environment coming out of the stomach to activate. So those are the types of things that can be causing undigested food in stool. If you see that, so try chewing better. You can also assess your stomach acid production. For this, I recommend just using apple cider vinegar test, because that's pretty gentle, pretty benign, and it'll give you an idea. The way you would do that is you would start with maybe a teaspoon or two mixed in maybe 4 ounces of water, and take it right when you start to eat a meal, just right before. And if you don't notice anything, then you actually could benefit from a little extra acid support. Keep titrating it up little by little until you get to 2 tablespoons. And then if that doesn't do anything, that's when you know you could actually use some acid support. At 1 to 2 teaspoons, we're just starting low. Let's just say you produce too much acid and you don't need acid support. Acid would actually cause reflux or heartburn for you. We don't want to start out with 2 tablespoons. So we're starting out with 2 teaspoons just to dip our toe in the water, make sure you're not super sensitive, and then graduate up to 2 tablespoons. And then if the 2 tablespoons doesn't make you feel anything, then you actually need a little acid, or you could benefit from a little bit of acid. Whereas if at any point you notice burning or heartburn or reflux, then that tells you you don't need extra acid. So that's one way at home you can evaluate this as well. And other tests they can do clinically, breath tests for lactose, sucrose intolerance. So if you have excess gas and bloating after eating, that might be something to have evaluated as well. Now let's talk about some things you can do aside from testing to start nourishing your gut microbiome and balancing out your gut. So even if, let's say, you plan to see a doctor, maybe your appointment's on the calendar 2 months down the road because the GI can't get you in any sooner, or maybe you're just not ready to go to the doctor. You want to see what you can do at home. You don't have to wait to start improving this. So I would recommend going on an appropriate elimination diet if your symptoms are severe and really troublesome and you need to calm them down. Within that framework, though, diversity is key. So diversity is something we want to emphasize. That means a variety of different plant-based foods. We don't count diversity of white flour, like refined plant foods. So white rice, white flour, I'm not talking about those, but fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. If you're cringing because these are the very foods that aggravate you, I know. And these are the foods that we often have to cut back on. So I'm suggesting if you have a sensitive system, start with what would be the best tolerated and just start with a small amount. So best tolerated small amount would be something like brown rice and cooked vegetables. But in just understanding that instead of just getting some, you want a diversity, you want to vary it up and maybe have a small bit of a few different kinds in there. And what that does is it feeds a variety of different good bacteria, and you don't need very much. And that's where it can really be something that's doable for even the most sensitive individuals. I have even my most sensitive clients. Now, maybe not in the beginning. If you're still just struggling to figure out what you can eat to calm your symptoms down, that's not the time to focus on diversity, because that will actually distract you from trying to figure out what to eliminate. So first step is calming your symptoms down. But I'm talking now about the people who are stuck in that stuck place where you have calmed your symptoms down, but you have to stay super strict with your diet and you're not really able to break out from there. So pick the foods that you can eat. I know on the low FODMAP list, there are a ton of fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds, even some legumes that you can eat in small amounts. The Monash app, which is my top recommended low FODMAP diet app, will tell you you can have one Brussels sprout, I think, or a half a Brussels sprout. That's a silly example because you might not want to make them, but maybe you could. You can buy a handful of Brussels sprouts. You can buy them individually, and you could even put them in chop them up with some different vegetables. Maybe the rest of the vegetables are low FODMAP, and you could certainly then roast them in a pan. And in your one little serving, you have your half a Brussels sprout. So this is honestly what we're talking about. Of course, it has to be practical. You want to buy foods that you can get in just a small serving and have them just in little bits here and there. And I talk about this with beans too. Even if you're low FODMAP, you could probably tolerate 1 tablespoon or 2 tablespoons of garbanzo beans, especially if they're canned, drained, and rinsed, or a tablespoon of black bean. It's just that most of us, if we don't understand how important diversity is to feed a diverse microbiome, we think, what's the point of opening a can of beans to just eat 1 tablespoon? There's no point. Or it's not really giving me that much fiber. That's what, half a gram of fiber? How is that worth it? Because we're feeding bacteria and they are extremely tiny. And that 1 tablespoon makes a big difference in our microbiome, especially when we can get some of these things into our diet consistently. So first step, find some foods that you can get into your diet more consistently, even if in small amounts. Maybe for 3 days a week, you're going to have that tablespoon of black beans. If you want to be extra cautious, don't have it 2 days in a row, skip a day in between. Do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Once you get that on board, maybe you always have green beans for dinner. Maybe mix up the green beans with a couple other vegetables. If you're really nervous about this, because as I mentioned in the beginning, we can get afraid of food. We can get afraid to try anything, especially if whenever you've tried to stray from your restrictive diet, you've had symptoms happen. If you are feeling that way, you can do this within your low FODMAP, your safe framework, or your low histamine or whatever diet you're on, and just pick from the foods that are allowed. So instead of green beans, you could mix green beans with some zucchini and maybe some carrots. That doesn't sound like a very natural mix, but let's see. Or okay, green beans, zucchini, and maybe some red bell peppers, and just make a medley. You can have a very small portion, cook them well, and you'll be able to tolerate that. So that's what we're talking about, and take these steps gradually. The great news about this is we want to take steps gradually because it's hard to make drastic steps. So from just being able to adopt new habits, that's important, but also it's not just easier on you, it's better for your microbiome. Your microbiome will not like giant shifts. You don't want to go from eating 10 plant foods per week to 30 plant foods per week overnight. So you want to take very small steps and give your body time to get used to each step, but find things you can be consistent with, because it does not help if you have a tablespoon of black beans today and you don't have them again for 3 weeks. If you were going to build up muscles, you'd go into the gym, you'd pick a consistent weight routine, and you'd do it 2 to 3 times a week. And then you'd gradually build on that. And that's exactly the approach we want to take with the microbiome. Add black beans, for example, 3 times a week. Next week, add a serving of vegetables, but make it maybe a few different vegetables from what you usually do. You keep the black beans in there, and now you have the diverse vegetables. And then maybe the third week, now you add a smoothie where you put a few different fruits in there that are still maybe low FODMAP. But our goal is to get more diverse plant foods in the diet. Chew the food really well, 30 to 40 times. That's going to be a big habit change, and it can make a really big difference. And eat in a relaxed state. This cannot be overemphasized. First of all, this is important because when we're not in a relaxed state, our body is not focusing on digestion. And so our body's not producing enough enzymes. It's not releasing enough hydrochloric stomach acid. It's not releasing enough bile because it's not focusing on what we're doing. If we're not focusing on eating, neither is our body. And calm down, rest, relax. That opens up the signaling between the brain and the gut to digest our food. So do this with a few slow, deep breaths. Breathe in for 4, hold it, and breathe out for 8. And breathe deep into your belly, not shallow into your chest. Actually put your hand over your belly. So make sure your hand is going up and down on the belly. That's how you know you're breathing deep into your belly. And do this, just take a few breaths, maybe 1 or 2 minutes before you start eating, and that will help as well. So these are the few actionable things. If you're interested in testing, this is the testing I do with my patients. So you can see me for these tests, although I don't just sell tests. It would be part of a program of work that we would do together to then use the test results to help you get the results you're looking for. But the SIBO test is something that your gastroenterologist may order for you. So you could request that if you have a doctor that you're working with. The comprehensive digestive stool analysis, that's something we use in functional nutrition and functional medicine, and naturopathic doctors use them. So that's not the type of stool test your GI would order. He would order a more narrow a stool test that just has a few different markers to test for like kind of major outliers. So that test you would want to get through me or from a local naturopath or functional medicine practitioner that you're working with. And I'll put in the comments the link to my veggie mash guide. And so today we've been talking about getting diversity, even if in small amounts. So my veggie mash is one way to get a diverse number of different vegetables in a very small serving. That you can pre-batch it, put it in ice cube containers and just pop out a cube and throw it into a smoothie, mix it into an entree, mix it into a soup, blend it into a sauce, what have you. So check that out. That's a really cool guide. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Have a great day and see you next week for our weekly gut chat.